Billions of years ago, on the young planet Earth, simple organic compounds assembled into more complex coalitions that could grow and reproduce. They were the very first life on Earth, and they gave rise to every one of the billions of species that have inhabited our planet since. At the time, Earth was almost completely devoid of what we'd recognize as a suitable environment for living things. The young planet had widespread volcanic activity and an atmosphere that created hostile conditions. So where on Earth could life begin? To begin the search for the cradle of life, it's important to first understand the basic necessities for any life form. Elements and compounds essential to life include hydrogen, methane, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, phosphates, and ammonia. In order for these ingredients to commingle and react with each other, they need a liquid solvent, water. And in order to grow and reproduce, all life needs a source of energy. Life forms are divided into two camps: autotrophs, like plants, that generate their own energy, and heterotrophs, like animals, that consume other organisms for energy. The first life form wouldn't have had other organisms to consume, of course, so it must have been an autotroph, generating energy either from the sun or from chemical gradients. So what locations meet these criteria? Places on land or close to the surface of the ocean have the advantage of access to sunlight. But at the time when life began, the UV radiation on Earth's surface was likely too harsh for life to survive there. One setting offers protection from this radiation and an alternative energy source: the hydrothermal vents that wind across the ocean floor, covered by kilometers of seawater and bathed in complete darkness. A hydrothermal vent is a fissure in the Earth's crust where seawater seeps into magma chambers and is ejected back out at high temperatures, along with a rich slurry of minerals and simple chemical compounds. Energy is particularly concentrated at the steep chemical gradients of hydrothermal vents. There's another line of evidence that points to hydrothermal vents: the last universal common ancestor of life, or LUCA for short. LUCA wasn't the first life form, but it's as far back as we can trace. Even so, we don't actually know what LUCA looked like. There's no LUCA fossil, no modern-day LUCA still around. Instead, scientists identified genes that are commonly found in species across all three domains of life that exist today. Since these genes are shared across species and domains, they must have been inherited from a common ancestor. These shared genes tell us that LUCA lived in a hot, oxygen-free place and harvested energy from a chemical gradient, like the ones at hydrothermal vents. There are two kinds of hydrothermal vent: black smokers and white smokers. Black smokers release acidic, carbon dioxide-rich water, heated to hundreds of degrees Celsius and packed with sulfur, iron, copper, and other metals essential to life. But scientists now believe that black smokers were too hot for LUCA, so now the top candidates for the cradle of life are white smokers. Among the white smokers, a field of hydrothermal vents on the mid-Atlantic ridge called Lost City has become the most favored candidate for the cradle of life. The seawater expelled here is highly alkaline and lacks carbon dioxide, but is rich in methane and offers more hospitable temperatures. Adjacent black smokers may have contributed the carbon dioxide necessary for life to evolve at Lost City, giving it all the components to support the first organisms that radiated into the incredible diversity of life on Earth today. Did you know that a single-celled organism caused the first mass extinction? Check out this animation about how it almost wiped out life on Earth and paved the way for complex life.
There are a lot of amazing theories in science. The general theory of relativity, atomic theory, the cell theory, And one thing we want to point out about a scientific theory is that it's a lot different from how you might use the word theory in your daily life. A scientific theory is not an educated guess. A scientific theory is an explanation of a scientific event, supported by scientific evidence. It must be testable and tested over and over and over again. And while theories can be changed or even disproven, you do want to realize there are a lot of facts behind them. One of our favorite theories of all time is the endosymbiotic theory. We love it because we just find the events in this theory to be amazing. The theory gives an explanation for how eukaryote cells could have evolved from prokaryote cells that lived in symbiosis. Prokaryote symbiosis means these organisms live together. So just to recap from our Intro to Cells video, when you think of prokaryote, think of pro rhyming with no nucleus, no membrane-bound organelles. Eukaryotes, on the other hand, remember eu rhymes with do, and they do have a nucleus, and other membrane-bound organelles. Both prokaryotes and eukaryotes are cells, though, and therefore they do have a few things in common that cells have, including a cell membrane, cytoplasm, ribosomes, and genetic material. But just look at these two cell types and you will see that one is way more simple. So what explanation does the endosymbiotic theory provide for how eukaryote cells could have evolved from prokaryote cells? A long time ago, seriously a long time, over 2 billion years ago, there were prokaryotes, much like there are today. They've been around for a long time. Well, just as there are in many organisms, there was variety in prokaryotes. Some of the prokaryotes had photosynthetic abilities, which means they could make their own food using sunlight energy. And those were the photosynthetic bacteria. Some of these prokaryotes were bacteria that had the ability to use oxygen to produce ATP energy. And some prokaryotes were larger, they could consume others, engulfing them. So obviously they had to be larger. The endosymbiotic theory is that some of these large cells engulfed some of these small bacteria. But instead of those small bacteria getting digested, some of them remained intact, and they actually began to live as symbionts. That means they lived together. This is believed to be the ancestor heterotroph eukaryote cell. And eventually, some of these cells engulfed the small bacteria that could do photosynthesis in addition, and there were some more living as symbionts. This is believed to be the ancestor autotroph eukaryote. Now, it's time to do a little reveal. We consider the bacteria that used oxygen to produce their own energy to have evolved into what is now mitochondria. And the bacteria that use sunlight energy to produce their own food, well, we consider those to have evolved into what are now chloroplasts. It's likely that these ancient eukaryotes had some kind of advantage in their endosymbiosis, and it's also likely that the mitochondria developed first, before the chloroplasts, because if you remember from our Intro to Cells video, nearly all eukaryote cells have mitochondria. It's just that eukaryote cells that can do photosynthesis can have both mitochondria and chloroplast. Now, if you remember our beginning about theories, you may be wondering, where are the facts for this? We'll give you a few of the facts. First, mitochondria and chloroplasts have their own DNA. Yes, separate DNA from what is found in the nucleus. Not to mention that their DNA is arranged in a similar way to prokaryote DNA, specifically bacterial DNA. The size of mitochondria and chloroplasts tend to be similar to the size of bacteria. And when mitochondria and chloroplasts divide, which they can divide all on their own independently, they divide in a way that is similar to how bacteria divide. So the endosymbiotic theory provides an explanation for how modern eukaryotes evolved from prokaryotes. There's obviously more questions you might want to explore. For example, what about some of the other structures and organelles in eukaryotes? Well, keep exploring. Secondary endosymbiosis is a great place to start. One last thing we want to make sure to emphasize. Endosymbiosis isn't just reserved for a theory that explains a past event in ancient history. No, because endosymbiosis is actually happening today with many other kinds of organisms. One of our favorite examples, the termite. Yes, termites can have prokaryotes that live in their gut and help them digest wood. And without them, well, let's just say digesting wood wouldn't happen so well. Well, that's it for the Amoeba Sisters, and we remind you to stay curious.